Hello everyone and welcome. Today I want to introduce you guys to these Art Elements polymer clays. Now several months ago this stuff appeared on the shelf at my local Walmart and I initially took notice of it because of these beautiful vibrant colors. Now I didn't purchase all of the colors, but they did have a really good selection in various different shades of each. And they are all sold in these individual 2-ounce bricks, which I was really excited about since I don't have a lot of local buying options and tend to purchase most of my clays online. Now, because I was shopping at Walmart and wasn't familiar with the brand, I didn't have very high hopes for the quality of these, but I have had some time to kind of play and experiment with them, and I'm pleased to say that they are not at all what I was expecting. Now the packaging here is pretty standard. It just says Art Elements Oven Bake Polymer Clay. I like that the label is simple. It doesn't look like something that's made for children, which was a good sign to me. On the back side here, these are just some disclaimers. There is a QR code and I did not scan it, but I did visit their website at artskills.com. The company has been selling art products since 1987 and they have a pretty wide range of supplies from paint and canvases to poster supplies, even larger like home decor items, and of course this clay. They are women-owned, which I'm always happy to support, and they do have a whole section of their website that is dedicated to projects and inspirations. On the other side of the package here, we have the baking and usage instructions, the color, and then some warnings here on the bottom. Now, I do have some issues with this part of the label that I'd like to address, but for now, let's take this out and have a look at the clay. So the very first thing I noticed upon opening this was that this clay is very, very solid, and this isn't uncommon. A lot of the better quality polymer clays tend to be much firmer out of the package, and while this stuff is quite a bit more solid, I think, than like the Primo and Fimo clays, it certainly isn't a bad sign, although it will require a fair amount of conditioning before you can use it. Now, I'm not going to bore you guys with the conditioning process, but once you get it conditioned, it is not bad clay. The consistency is very nice. It's soft enough that you can still mold and shape it, but it's still firm enough that it doesn't deform easily, which makes it especially great for pieces that require you to hold them in your fingers or pick them up a lot. This also makes it easier to smooth and significantly reduces fingerprints. Now, the texture of this stuff is a little bit different. It's not sticky or tacky at all, which is great, but it does feel quite a bit denser and heavier in my hands. Maybe not as smooth and elastic as many of the others, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I do have some other clays here to kind of compare and show you what I'm talking about. So the level of elasticity in polymer clay can range pretty significantly depending on what you're using, with the softer clays generally being more stretchy and the harder clays falling in at the lesser end of that spectrum. And this particular clay I would place at the very bottom, being much harder and less stretchy than any of the others. Now, just like the other clays, you can roll this out even into thin sheets and it holds together very well. You can also turn it into ropes and they can be bent and coiled without any risk of splitting or cracking, which is great. So it does have some elasticity to it. But if you try to pull it apart, you will notice that it stretches very little and then breaks clean. And it's the same with the sheet here. Very, very little stretch and a pretty clean break. Next up, I've got some Sculpey Primo, which I chose because it is firm but not quite solid, and you can see that we've got quite a bit more stretch when I pull it apart here. And the same thing with the sheet, it stretches quite a bit before it rips. Next up, I've got some Sculpey 3 oven bake clay, which I know to be much softer, and you can see that it is stretchy and pulls apart much more easily. And on the sheet, again, very stretchy before it finally rips, and it does not rip clean. So the Art Elements clay is definitely thicker and more structured than a lot of the others, and you can certainly feel that when you're working with it. The texture of this stuff, I would say, is more comparable to that of the Sculpey Color Effect clays. Now this is some Sculpey Pearl Effect, but you can get them in pearls and metallics or glitter and stone effects. And these clays, even within the same brand, tend to be much denser and more firm, likely because they have things added to them. For example, I have got the regular Sculpey here again, and it is firm, but I can dent it pretty easily with my finger. This is the Sculpey Pearl Effect, so the same brand, and it is much firmer. And while this clay feels very similar in texture to the clay Color Effects, the Art Elements clay does perform much better. The Color Effect clays tend to be crumbly on the edges when you roll them out, and they are very prone to splitting and cracking, while this clay is not. Now, out of the 9 colors that I purchased, not all of them performed the same. Some of the colors, mainly the lighter ones like this pink, seemed much more crumbly out of the package and required more effort to condition. And this particular color, along with the white, even after working for quite some time, were still very dry feeling and prone to splitting and cracking, which obviously isn't good. Now, fortunately, I was able to work in some oil on my fingertips to get this to a smoother, more desirable consistency, but overall, it was not great. Now, the other 2 lighter colors, aside from being crumbly and harder to condition, they did hold together much better, and the rest of my colors performed pretty consistently with that first blue that I opened. Now, regardless of what brand you're using, it is not at all uncommon for certain colors to perform a little bit differently, which is why I made sure to grab a few of each shade so that I could test them against each other, not just on performance, but also on how well they baked. And I did have some mixed results with these colors after baking, but you can see in the before and after photos here that most of them maintained their color pretty well. The lighter colors came out just slightly darker. The medium colors are almost undiscernible from the unbaked bricks, and the dark color that I had seemed to darken quite a bit more. Now, I would like to note that despite its thicker texture, this clay cuts very smoothly. Even that light pink and white color that I had some issues with turned out just fine. I like the way this stuff feels after it's baked too. It's not too heavy or too light, which is great, and it feels very similar to a hard plastic. It's stiff and rigid, but still very flexible. You can fold these points back pretty far without any risk of cracking or breaking, so it's certainly not brittle, and it's not too soft either, which is great. Now, coming back to that package label, the biggest issue I had was with the baking instructions. This clay recommends baking at 250 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 minutes per 1/4 inch of thickness. And while these numbers do fluctuate from clay to clay, the lower temperature recommendations generally are accompanied by a much longer baking time. So this seemed odd to me. Now, for the sake of testing, I did make a few shapes following those package instructions, and while it looks okay and seems rigid enough, as soon as I started bending it, I immediately noticed some surface cracks beginning to form. Now, the second piece I made, I baked about 10 minutes longer and still got a very similar result. The clay seemed a little bit brittle and not very flexible. Now, the sample pieces that I showed you previously, I baked at 275 for right around 30 minutes. And as you've already seen, not only did they not burn, but they were also much more flexible and durable after baking. And this decision was based on the fact that this clay was still brittle even after 25 minutes at the recommended temperature. And because most clays don't exceed 30 minutes on the time, my concern was that in increasing the bake time would impact the colors. So because these are, again, very similar in texture to some of those Primos that cook at 275, I simply increased the temperature. Now the rest of this label is pretty standard. Wash your hands before and after each use. Obviously you don't want to microwave or over bake it, and then clay may stain or damage unprotected surfaces. Now I did notice some color transfer on these to both my hands and my work surface, but nothing significant, although you will want to wash everything really good between colors. Everything that I used cleaned up nicely though with some soap and water. I didn't have any issues with staining. So overall, I would say that this is a medium quality clay. I don't love it, but I don't hate it either. Now, I wouldn't recommend this clay for beginner users just because of its hardness and those consistency issues. But if you're a clay artist who's looking for an affordable alternative that's decent quality and accessible, I think this is a really great choice. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure and hit that like button. Let me know in the comments below if you have tried this particular brand of clay, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well for more content like this. That is all for today, guys. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.